So welcome everyone and thank you for joining us. My name is Alessandro Di Mattia. I'm a legal and executive assistant at PrivacyRules. The topic of today is a very relevant one and is the one related to tracking technologies and cookies. That is one of the topic of the moment. And I'm pleased to be joined by two very relevant guest speakers today that are Dr. Norbert Vass, that is coming from the Data Protection Authority of Hungary and is, of course, a data privacy and data protection expert. And also Grzegorz Jendroszczyk, that comes from Piwik PRO and is a data protection officer there. And I thank really them for joining us today. And together with them, we have three of our experts that comes from Belgium and Hungary. We have Geert Somers, that will act as moderator, and Geert is a partner specialized in technology and data protection and Timelex in Belgium. And then we have Alekszej Dubalar, that is also senior lawyer and data protection expert at Lakatos Köves in Hungary. And finally, we have Ben Fitten, that is flanking Geert Somers from Timelex and is also a data privacy expert, of course. So I would like to thank all of our speakers and all of you for joining us today. And without further delay, I turn it over to Geert, thanking him again. Geert, to you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Alessandro, and thanks to everyone joining here. A lot can be said about cookies and tracking technologies because, let's face it, tracking internet users is a big business and it's no longer about cookies only. It's a very hot topic both for businesses and regulators, but also for the supervisory authorities. On the one hand, you have the very far-reaching commercial and data analytics possibilities of cookies and tracking technologies, making them a very powerful tool to better target your audience, be it to sell product services, but also to advertise job vacancies or for other reasons. And on the other hand, you have that enormous privacy impact, making that cookie compliance has become one of the main priorities even of several data protection authorities throughout Europe. We've seen that in Belgium, France, Ireland, Denmark, a number of countries, the UK, there have been investigations and reports from data protection authorities specifically on cookies. It's actually also because cookie compliance can easily be followed from a distance by data protection authorities. So they can do research and actually check whether websites are compliant. So, and also because of this impact that cookies and these tracking technologies have. And as a matter of fact, quite a few administrative fines are being imposed. It's also likely, in our opinion, that more and even higher fines may be imposed in the coming months and years. So it's definitely worth to pay enough attention to cookies and tracking technologies. Of course, everyone is eagerly waiting for what will happen at the European level with the e-privacy regulation. For many years, we thought that it would be adopted. We're now waiting for the final version, hopefully to come rather soon to bring some clarity. Well, cookies are not only about GDPR. We have to look at the GDPR and the e-privacy regulation at the same time. Because we will see that for cookies, you need consent, but this consent needs to be transparent based on clear and comprehensive information. That's where the GDPR and the e-privacy regulation meet. So voila, as you can see, there are many reasons why this topic deserves debating, and that's why I'm also happy to moderate this webinar with speakers from various disciplines, voicing the views from the private sector, the supervisory authorities, and also outside counsel. I'm sure that all the followers of this webinar are eager to learn more from the various speakers. I still propose to start with a very brief, let's say 1 or 2 minute introduction on what cookies are and how they are regulated from a legal perspective, just for those webinar viewers who are not yet too familiar with the topic, but we'll keep that brief. And then we can also look at other tracking technologies, how website visitors should be informed, how consent should be obtained, etc. So let's start with a brief introduction. Maybe Bernd, could you tell us in few words and in very simple words what cookies are?
Yes, well, if you have ever read a cookie policy before, you will know that cookies are small text files that store information in your web browser. And these can be placed by the website owner or a third party. And also some cookies are deleted when you close the browser, but some stay there for years until you delete them yourself or until they expire. But as Geert already mentioned, many other technologies exist to track you as a visitor. And from a legal perspective, the difference is not really important. So for the sake of clarity, today we will just talk about cookies. But just know that it's more than only cookies.
Indeed, that's, I think, a very important distinction to make. And could you tell us a bit more what cookies are used for and other tracking technologies?
Well, it depends on the kind of cookie. There are many different purposes that a cookie can be used for, and these purposes should be explained in the cookie policy. And we see in our practice that there is some kind of tendency towards more complex cookie policies, but at the same time, the cookie policy should remain understandable for any visitor. So that's often a balancing exercise.
Yeah, indeed. I guess that's important. So there are many different purposes of cookies. And what would be their common classification if you look at their purpose when you're looking at such a cookie or drafting such a cookie policy?
Uh, well, you could say that there are generally four types of cookies. We have the ones that are essential, functional cookies, analytical cookies, and marketing cookies.
Mhm.
To give you some examples, functional cookies can store login details so that you don't have to enter them again when you return to the same website. Often websites also collect general statistics, which is done by placing analytical cookies. But from a data protection point of view, marketing cookies are the most intrusive types of cookies because they are used to make ads more personal to you.
That seems clear, Berend. And what does the law say then about cookies?
Well, if you as a website owner want to make use of cookies, in most cases you will have to obtain the consent of the visitor before you use them. And it's also important to keep in mind that does not only apply to websites, but also to mobile devices or apps.
Okay, indeed. And then I have one final question for you to conclude the introduction, Berend. How do you obtain such consent? And does the consent have to meet certain requirements?
Indeed, Geert, we are all familiar with cookie banners on the internet. Often you can give your consent by clicking that you agree, so that the cookie banner disappears. But this cookie banner is in most cases way too small to fit all the information that is needed. So the banner should refer to the cookie policy that I mentioned earlier. But in any case, as long as a visitor doesn't click to agree, no cookies, most cookies cannot be placed. And there are many other things to consider. For instance, the cookie banner should allow to make a choice between different types of cookies. So you could want to agree to functional cookies, but not to marketing cookies. So this should be possible.
Okay, thank you. I think what you last said is very important because quite a few also EU-based websites are not always complying with these consent modalities indicated by the visitor through the cookie banner. Sometimes they will assume consent even if there hasn't been any explicit action. We also know that quite a few websites go very far in pushing the user towards accepting the cookie modalities. Or they'll set up very tricky consent mechanisms. So some may be compliant, others not, and the line is not always easy to draw. I'm sure a lot of people will have questions in that respect. As I also said, supervisory authorities are quite on top of this. So it would be good to hear from Greg what his experience is with consent as a DPO of a data analytics service provider. Greg, I heard you don't like the term cookie banner. Why is that, and what term would you prefer?
Yeah. I mean, I don't like it because it's like not 2012. The two terms currently mean exactly the same, as it's difficult to change the habits of people who use the phrase cookie banner for like last 10 years. I prefer to speak of consent form, as it reflects the fact that cookies are not the only personal data that is being used in analytics, ad tech, and marketing tech solutions. There are multiple data that should be considered as personal data in internet technologies. We have fingerprinting, right? So method of creating profile based on the type of the browser, plugins, installed resolution, IP number, and like similar variables. We can also do server-side tracking, which sends requests from the backend of applications. And of course, as always, we can analyze server logs. And none of these methods are using cookies, but all of them create profile of the visitor, and so should require a consent.
Yeah, I guess for visitors, it's often very difficult to know what is happening in the background. As you said, a lot is possible. Well, I guess this consent is what we know under the term opt-in, meaning that prior consent should be obtained before the processing of the personal data is started. Maybe back to Berend, are there some exceptions to this rule of opt-in? Could you tell us what these exceptions entail?
Yes, indeed. Consent is not required for essential cookies. So those are the cookies that that are really needed for the functioning of the website. So some examples of such cookies, in my opinion, are load balancing session cookies or video player session cookies. But as long as these cookies do not allow to track the visitor via social media, for instance. But if they do, you still need to obtain the consent, even if you just want to play a video on your website.
Okay, and all this is based on the European legal framework mostly. Huh? So maybe this would be interesting to hear more from Norbert. Could you tell us a bit more about the e-privacy directive and the e-coming e-privacy regulation, as I mentioned in the beginning? Norbert, what impact do you think the e-privacy regulation will have on location technologies, for example?
In my opinion, the e-privacy regulation's main advantage is to increase predictability for all stakeholders, because data controllers, data subjects, and even authorities have a much more difficult time now that the legal regulation isn't 100% complete in this subject, because originally the GDPR was to enter into effect and apply in 2018 together with the new e-privacy regulation. So many subjects were not regulated in the GDPR because of that. And one of the subjects is e-privacy. And this e-privacy regulation would replace the existing e-privacy directive, which is just a directive, so not directly applicable. It needs to be implemented by member states. However, the problem is that it also has it also gives an obligation to member states to implement it. So as long as the directive is still in effect, the national laws that are based on this directive cannot change, even if the GDPR would require them to change. So this creates some legal uncertainty. And I think this will be solved by the e-privacy regulations. So when it arises, no matter what it will say, it will be good for everyone, because many things that are unclear now or uncertain can become clearer.
Yeah, I believe so. I think that's why many people are eagerly waiting for the adoption of the e-privacy regulation, indeed, especially to bring more clarity. So you think also that currently the Hungarian law is not compliant then, or how would you say that with the GDPR?
Well, the problem is that for years there was a data protection regulation in Hungary, a data protection laws in Hungary, which were created before the GDPR, and also the e-privacy directive was created way before the GDPR in 2002, and these were applied in conjunction with each other, and there is lot of years of court practice and authority practice how to apply these together, but now half of these is gone. The data protection laws of the member states have been replaced by the GDPR, but the other half remained unchanged. So the e-privacy rules are unchanged, but somehow they need to be differently applied because the environment in which they are applied is now very different due to the GDPR. So some interpretation is necessary in order to apply them correctly.
And even if we have any privacy regulations, let's say next year, if that would be a safe guess in 2021, we would still have to wait because just like the GDPR, it will not apply immediately. So this situation of having to interpret, but at least the text will be there. So it will be easier, I guess, to make these interpretations. Is that correct from your point of view? Once the text is there, even if the actual entry into force will be later.
Yes, I think even if the actual entering into force will require 1 or even 2 years from the acceptance of the text, once we have a finalized text and we know that it will become effective, it can be relied on to interpret the existing GDPR regulations more effectively and with regard to how the future will be.
Okay. And the new text of the e-privacy regulation will most likely, well, it will not be just about cookies. Neither is the current e-privacy directive, of course. The regulation has to stay neutral. What is your view on that? Just that we're not only talking about cookies, but also about other technologies.
Well, both the GDPR and the current text of the e-privacy regulation draft are technology neutral for a specific reason. Some say that this creates some issues with the GDPR. It's more difficult to interpret because it generalizes a lot of things. So it does not go into the details of technology, but this is required because such EU laws as the GDPR and the e-privacy laws change very, very slowly, as we can see. So they cannot follow the technological advancement. So they need to be as general and technology neutral as possible. So the new laws will not even directly mention, according to the current draft, cookies in the main text of the privacy regulation. They regulate how, for example, end-user equipment can be accessed by websites. So the effect, the result is what the law tries to regulate, not the technical implementation.
Yeah, I see. But then for authorities, it's also a challenge to have to enforce both the e-privacy framework and the GDPR.
Well, currently it's not clear who will be appointed to enforce the e-privacy regulations. Because most of the e-privacy related issues are currently, for example, in Hungary and many other member states, not enforced by the DPAs. There is a separate authority for that. And it is most likely, but yet not finalized, that some sort of parallel authority competence will be in this regard.
Okay. And what advice would you have for a company that tries to move away from the standard cookie banner, knowing that cookies are excellent tools to improve the user experience?
Well, the authority's job is really not to say how to do something, because there are a million ways to do something, and if the authorities would say you can do it this one way, then everyone would only do that one way, and that wouldn't be good for anybody. So I believe it's more to say what not to do, because that is something that can be used as a basis how to do something if you know what you shouldn't do. So, for example, many cookie banners haven't been updated after the GDPR, and as mentioned previously, the context of the privacy laws changed due to the GDPR. For example, the conditions of consent are stricter, so simply browsing and simply continuing browsing will not be interpreted as valid consent. And for example, this is also one of the topics that were discussed by the European Data Protection Board, which consists of one member from each data protection authority in the EU. And they have also issued guidance on this. And this guideline 5/2020 concerns the issue of consent, and this is just an update from their previous guideline, but it specifically states that simply continuing to use a website will not be construed as valid consent under the GDPR. So this is something that is very likely to be an issue, and also old cookie banners tend not to have too much information, just that this website uses cookies, that's that, and no more information is present. Of course, as mentioned previously here, it is not possible to put all information on a small banner, but it is possible to put a link on it and layer the information of data processing activities is something that is also detailed in this guideline that I mentioned, that it is a possibility and it is something that can be used effectively, but it is a balancing issue that it shouldn't be too complex and too many levels.
I see. Yeah, as a matter of fact, we mentioned the regulator, we mentioned the supervisory authorities, but there's of course also the courts, and there has been an important judgment from the European Court of Justice in the Planet 49 case. Maybe could you say something about that also, Norbert?
Yes, the Court of Justice of the European Union stated in the Planet 49 case that static checkboxes and any conduct on the website alone is not considered valid consent. So it also reinforced what the European Data Protection Board said in the guideline. And it also stated that there is a minimum requirement for the information. For example, what kind of information is used, who has access to this information, and how long this information is kept. And if these minimal information are not present, then the consent is not informed.
Okay. Good. I see there was a question from the audience, which I think you could also answer. Can a website block users that do not consent to cookies? Actually, we're talking about the use of cookie walls here. What is your view on that, Norbert?
Well, my view must be the same as the European Data Protection Board, because that's a supreme body of all DPAs. And that also in this specific guideline I mentioned, in guideline number 5 of 2020, this guideline was specifically made for 2 changes in the previous guideline. And one of the changes was to specifically add that cookie walls are not in compliance with the GDPR, because that's not free choice, and without free choice, the consent is not valid under the GDPR.
Okay, that's of course when cookies are not strictly necessary. Some cookies are necessary for the operation of a website. So what do you consider necessary cookies which do not fall under that cookie wall?
Well, there is, again, I must refer to a guideline of the European Data Protection Board, which is guideline 2 of 2019, which specifies the use of one of the legal bases of the GDPR, which is Article 6(1)(b). So when something is necessary to fulfill a contract, and this also applies in this case. So that describes that something must be objectively required to provide that specific service or to maintain that specific website technically, and it is not a question of what the data controller says in their contractual terms, what they require. It must be an objective requirement, and this also details what is really required and what is not required.
Okay, that's a very good summary, I believe, to clarify the position also of the EDPB. Huh?
Yes.
Maybe I will thanks for that, jump to Greg. Well, cookies can affect user privacy on different levels, depending on the types of data they carry. In your opinion, Greg, what types of data stored in cookies should draw the attention of the regulators?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we just need to quickly analyze why everyone is so focused on cookies. Analytics cookies got their bad reputation because Google Analytics free version, which is extremely popular, uses this data for ad retargeting. And third-party cookies have their bad reputation because this is the main engine of display advertising ecosystem. So those companies create profile of internet visitors. Just look at the Facebook. Even if you don't have a Facebook account, they have your profile because their pixel, so like tracking code, is so popular all over the internet. So I would like regulators to understand that there is large difference between how the analytics cookie and remarketing cookies affect the privacy. And I would also would like the regulators to understand that you can have analytics cookies that describe session and not a visitor. And while we are talking to regulators, I would love to see them start the changes within their own backyard. So a lot of those government websites use Google Analytics free version, which basically allows their citizens' data to be sold for the use of the Google Analytics free version.
Okay, so you mentioned that analytical cookies rather describe a browsing session. In your opinion, does that mean that placing such cookies should be allowed on the basis of legitimate interest, meaning that a data controller won't need to obtain consent of the visitor?
No, not legitimate interest, which, as we all know, is like the grayest area of GDPR and is used extremely excessive by the ad tech companies. What I meant is that if you decide to shorten lifespan of the first-party analytic cookie to just the duration of a single session, this cookie identifier stops representing the user, returning visitor / profile, and start representing a session. And the cookie identifier, you could argue, stops being personal data, therefore should not require legal basis, whether legitimate interest, consent, or any other.
Okay, all right, good. So, of course, most websites will want as many consents as possible. Do you have particular recommendations, Greg, on how to raise the number of such consents?
Yeah, I have a few. Let's remember that on average, 30 to 40% of the visitors will not give you consent. And if your visitors are tech savvy or privacy aware enough, you could lose even 80% of the traffic in data in analytics. There are a few simple things you can do to increase conversions of your consent before going to, as the activists love to call it, dark patterns. So my first recommendation is to use bar and not a pop-up. We notice it has much better conversion rates. And by the way, my suggestions are not based on scientific size sample, so the result may vary. The second recommendation is make the text simple and easy to understand. Do not push all the information to the consent form. This is what privacy policy for, right? The consent and privacy policy should be written in what you may call Sesame Street language, very easy to understand.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, that's. Thank you so much, because I think the view from a company like yours, dealing with data analytics, is very interesting. I'm sure there will be also, well, hopefully, questions in that respect. I'll jump to Alekszej. Alekszej, we have been talking about consent. Could you tell us a bit more about the need for consent for direct marketing from your experience as a Hungarian counsel?
Yeah, sorry,
You were on mute.
I just get call on my phone. Sorry, I
Okay, no
start.
problem. That's fine. So the question was, if you could say a bit more about the need for consent for direct marketing.
The part should be clearly separated other data purposes, and the data subject can have the opportunity to make separate decision concerning it. And the European Data Protection Board explicitly stated and repeated requirements according to which the cookies for different purposes must be not connected, as mentioned Norbert before. And in this case, content of the information provided should more detailed, and for cookies that are absolutely necessary, and cookies are not absolutely necessary, and voluntary consent of data subject must be obtained separately. And in many cases is absolutely left behind, and data controllers choose unlawful way, and such practices violated GDPR in several aspects, and it lacks voluntary of consent, and usually the adequate information is not provided, and addition such practice clearly cannot be fair, and it's breach fundamental principles of the GDPR.
You're on mute.
That's better. No, I was my reply to that was that it's probably one of the main takeaways from this webinar later, is that a lot of companies in the past were copy pasting cookie policies, were not paying a lot of attention to it, but cookie policy, the consent mechanism, the banner, and then the cookie policy should be carefully drafted. You really have to know what type of cookies you're using, for what purposes, and all this has to be presented in a very transparent way, and consent has to be obtained in a very granular way also. So this I think is very important, again, also because it's visible from a distance, both how the cookies are being used and how the user is being informed about the use of the cookies and how the consent is obtained. So Alekszej, I very much agree that that this is very, very important. And how about the Hungarian legislator? Are there any particular strict rules in Hungary about sending out advertisements about products and services, or is it?
We talk about how the data processor can get the consent from data subjects, and we talked about before about asking, requesting the consent by email, and it is not not near to our topic, but in Hungary exists a special rule which prohibits such practice, and if data processor intends ask requests from data subject consent for their direct marketing, it is considered as direct marketing. So just requesting consent is considered as direct marketing. Therefore, for example, the banner during the using banner of cookies is very, very important for us, because we cannot asking consent by email in Hungary.
Okay. And do you think anything will change when the e-privacy regulation is adopted?
Yes, absolutely. If you see the text of the e-privacy regulation, there will be given the absolutely clear legal requirements for data processor and clearly allow to send request for consent to the data subjects who is existing business relationship with data processors, and therefore it is clarify the situation, and we will have clearly legal basis for sending such requests to data subjects for consent.
Yeah, it's probably one of the problems we still have now with regard to cookies and tracking technologies, because we have a directive. It's not very harmonized. The GDPR was a directive. Data protection, general data protection, was based on a directive before too, with national laws. So we have a regulation. It's hopefully the e-privacy regulation will indeed bring more harmonization in that respect too. So again, we don't know yet when, but let's hope that that it will come soon to avoid too much scattered approaches throughout Europe. And talking about which, we've been focusing on Europe, but there is of course also a larger scope. What about how are cookies dealt with at a more international level? Maybe Bernd, is this a question you could address?
Yes, well, we see in our practice that it can be a real challenge to comply with different laws, and even within the EU, the cookie laws are not exactly the same, because national cookie laws, as mentioned before, are a transposition of the e-privacy directive. I will give you an example to demonstrate how complex it can get. So in Belgium, you need the consent of for Google Analytics, but this is not needed in the Netherlands because they have an exemption in the law that says that you don't need to consent for using Google Analytics, for instance, or other analytical cookies.
Okay, so what should website operators do if their website targets several audiences, let's say a Belgian and a French or a Dutch audience?
I can think of two possible solutions. First solution is that you apply the strictest regime and just ask for consent. Or a second possibility is to try to identify the country where the visitor comes from, if you don't use a cookie for this, of course. So if in that case, you can show a different cookie banner if you want, but still people may use a VPN, so you actually don't know where the visitor is coming from. And that being said, it can get more complicated in an international setting. So if you look, let's take the Californian Privacy Law, the CCPA, as an example. Companies that do business in California should allow a data subject to opt out from a sale of their personal information. But then the question is, what is considered as a sale? Could you say that placing third-party tracking cookies is a sale? We don't know this yet for sure, but if the visitor clicks to agree to cookies, you could rely on a certain provision in the CCPA to argue that you didn't sell personal information. And if I may add to this, often online you see different kinds of cookie banners. So, and by looking at the banner, you can often deduce what kind of law the website operator is trying to comply with. In many cookie banners, you see a heavy emphasis on the partners that they share personal data with. That's because this is more of a requirement under American law than under GDPR.
Okay, well, that's actually very fascinating, Alessandro. Maybe we should organize a follow-up webinar addressing also that more international folk aspect, because indeed, websites are not limited to one country, one region. It's mostly international, and it would be interesting to focus more on how organizations operating worldwide should then be compliant, not just in the European Union, but also beyond. I think this is a very interesting question. Thank you, Ben, also for clarifying that. I've been looking more and more into the Californian Consumer Privacy Act, but it would definitely deserve more attention, and not just the CCPA, but also similar laws that are being adopted right now a bit throughout the world. And I guess that's also an added value of an organization like PrivacyRules, because PrivacyRules is not focused on the European Union, but PrivacyRules is a global alliance. So again, Alessandro, I'm eagerly looking forward to a similar webinar going beyond the European Union.
Definitely, Geert. Thank you. And yes, that's exactly what PrivacyRules seems to do. So we will definitely act in order to give a broader view on the use of tracking technologies and cookie policies at the international level. This time we were focusing more on the European Union, but of course it's not just about this. You mentioned the CCPA, but has it happened with the GDPR? After regulations pop up, other countries start following what the main commercial countries are doing. So probably once the e-privacy regulation will be definitely out, there will be a lot more to see. But many countries are already moving. So definitely we have to stay aware about what's happening worldwide. So definitely, thank you, Geert.
Okay, perfect. Alessandro, I saw that there were a couple of questions on the chat, but I believe that they have been answered. One question was in relation to the possibility of having a cookie wall. And another question was with regard to distinguishing between functional cookies, essential cookies, and non-essential cookies. So I believe that also has been answered. Which would mean that we could also finish sooner than the 1 hour time slot that we had foreseen. But maybe I will turn to the panelists if anyone has anything in particular to add. This is still the moment. But again, as I said, you can say a lot more about cookies, and we could also do that during another follow-up webinar where we go beyond.
I think there are some questions in the Q&A that haven't been answered.
Okay, then I'm not seeing all of them. Maybe. Please.
I think there are a couple of questions regarding how the cookie banner should look like. Mm-hmm. And what's the difference between having a cookie banner and a cookie wall? Because you have cookie banners, you have cookie pop-ups. Some banners are large, some banners are small, some banners allow you.
Ben, I cannot hear you anymore. I think.
Not me, sorry. I muted them.
Okay. Yeah. Where did I drop off?
10 seconds ago.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was saying that cookie banners, you can have a cookie banner, or you can have a cookie pop-up, or you have large banners, small banners that allow you to make a choice in the banner itself. But what is not allowed is to have a big pop-up on the screen where you say that where you have to click to agree to cookies, and then you can browse other pages on the website. That's not allowed. That's what we call a cookie wall, because you require the visitor to click to agree to cookies before he can even have a look at the website. So that's not allowed. And the question how the actual banner should look like, that's a decision that you that's dependent on the cookies that you use. So if we see in our practice that clients that use um, a lot of cookies, they tend to have more first level information in the banner itself. Whereas if you use only statistical cookies, for instance, but no marketing cookies, then you could have a banner that is smaller, and yeah, so it really depends on what you do with cookies and how many first level information that you want to give to the visitor. Yeah, so it's not a question that can be answered for everyone. It really depends on your situation, what is best.
Yeah, but then I have a question for you, because as a company, it may be difficult to know then where to start, whom to talk to. Would you agree that this should be a joint effort of, let's say, the compliance department with external counsel, but also
Yes.
the website builder? Because in my experience, a lot of companies don't always know what cookies they're using, and it's not a static
Yes.
something, like it evolves and new cookies are being used, and sometimes, yeah, voila, it's the website builder also who is in charge of that. So there has to be a constant interaction with,
Yes.
with the relevant stakeholders.
Yes, I fully agree with that. There was also a question in the Q&A that is relevant for your question, because often the legal department, they are more concerned with the liability that cookies might have, but the marketing department would like to have as many cookies as they can, because often cookies are very interesting to the marketing department. So it's true that even within the company, it's not always easy to agree on this. And we also often advise to our clients to not only have the cookie banner in place and cookie policy in place, but to actively keep on top of it, because any change to a website could have an impact on the cookies that you place. I will give you an example. If you implement a reCAPTCHA, for example, that works with cookies. So any change that you have on your website, you should ask yourself, does this have an impact on our cookie policy or our cookie banner? Do we have to make a change? And then there was another question in the Q&A regarding changing the cookie banner and the cookie policy. Let's say if you make a change to your website and this has an impact on the cookies that are being placed, of course, you have to show the cookie banner again if the visitor returns to your website. So what happens often is a visitor clicks agree, I agree with cookies, and then a cookie is being placed on your device that remembers this choice for a certain period of time. Sometimes this is 6 months, sometimes this is 1 year. So after, let's say it's 1 year, after 1 year, that cookie will be deleted. And if the visitor then comes back, the banner will show again and he has to make his choice again. But if you, within that year, make a change to your cookie policy, you have to make sure that the cookie policy, the cookie banner is displayed again to the same visitor when he comes back.
Sure. Yeah. That would be maybe Alekszej, from your private practice experience, is that do you have something in particular that you would like to share that your clients faced with regard to
regarding the lengthness of cookie banner, I think there is some antagonism between the simple notification stipulated by Article 12 of the GDPR and between the detailed information stipulated by Article 13 and 14 of the GDPR. And I think I absolutely agree with Georg and Bernd that short, compact length of the banner is not just only practical, but it is the legally correctly choice because it reaches the average users. And I think just the other situation just with direct marketing purposes, because there I think we shall provide more detailed information for data subject and give and receive their consent.
Okay, and yeah, is it more questions maybe also from the chat?
I received another one that I think may be for Grzegorz because it's related to the consent for a newsletter, and is how do you obtain consent for a newsletter and where do you keep it? And is it a mail with a yes or no coming from your contact form enough to be considered as consent for the newsletter?
Okay, so this is like much more complicated thing. Just consent for a newsletter, because you don't gather data because you want to send somebody a newsletter. You gather the data when you do a newsletter or white paper to process this data and also to send, for example, to your CRM for the sales team to process it. So straight away, there should be within the form that you say, please give us your email, there should be information that's, hey, I just giving you this email for the purpose of sending me email. And this is like one thing that happens automatically. If you click OK, you will get an email. This is like automatic consent. But if you want to use the same email to be pushed to your CRM, to be processed by your sales team and to contact, hey, you were interested in this and that, right? So perhaps we can sell you something. Then you have to do another, let's say, part of the opt-in when they should opt in into being processed and to sell to. So this is like a matter of what should be included. And I have like a couple of thoughts because I try to pace myself so everyone has their say regarding the paywalls. Now, everyone is like so quick to dismiss paywalls, but put yourself, and I would encourage every regulator or person responsible for preparing those, in the shoes of the publishers. Now, publishers are those like companies that provide you news and all. You have to pay some way to the journalists. You have to pay some way to all the people that are working on providing you this content. I mean, forbidding them to use cookies, especially the marketing cookies, will stop bringing in, from where they will take the revenue then.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Grzegorz. And there is another question that is, I think, for Dr. Vass, because it says, my company is based outside the European Union. Should we have EU representative to administer cookies of our EU clients? And should we choose an EU rep in a country where the local DPA is more lenient on cookies policies? I understand that Dr. Vass says that his authority does not provide guidance, but what if it would in a way that is more soft than in another EU country? In other words, some EU countries have established sort of fiscal paradises. Could the same happen for cookie policies?
I think because the e-privacy regulation will be EU-wide, there cannot be major differences between countries. This is one of the advantages of a regulation over a directive. It is not something that member states have to implement separately and maybe have differences. It will be uniform in all the EU, and hopefully it will be applied uniformly. I would like to draw attention to one of the provisions of the privacy regulation. Of course, it's still a draft, that the already mentioned the European Data Protection Board will play a role of coordination between the DPAs and other possible authorities who will enforce the e-privacy regulation in order to maintain a unified application throughout the EU.
Okay, perfect. And that's something that I think we are going to see in the future, and that's the scope of the regulation. We have another one that is from Gabriel. Most solutions on the market do tracking by default without the user knowing that there are tracking pixels. How do you provide transparency to those individuals? I don't know who would like to answer to.
Can I pick this up?
Yeah.
Because the question is here what we are saying regarding the solutions. If those are, I would always consider whether we are talking about like publisher, right? So where is the content when the content is provided, or whether somebody provides you an application. If you are talking an application, I would admit this is like basically for this is why legitimate interest was created. If you have an app that provides the information to the and you have to log in, for example, you're not like anonymous user. You agreed to some kind of terms of service, and if you are using those, and the pixel is being triggered with the information is being transferred. This is, I would wager, as long as you inform the people that you are doing it, it should be legitimate interest because they need this feedback information to basically better their solution out there. Now, if we are talking about the solutions as in web applications or native mobile applications, then of course every pixel, every cookie should require a consent, and there should be some kind of mechanism to trigger that.
Okay, perfect. And let's see, I think we still have time for another couple. That's, I think, for Norbert again. How do you calculate estimate fines under e-privacy, national law, combined with GDPR? You are on mute. Sorry.
So fines are calculated by the Hungarian DPA on a case-by-case basis. So there is no single table where we would derive the numbers when we make a fine. So it has to consider all the circumstances of the data controller and all the circumstances of what happened. So if the Hungarian DPA is issuing the fine, and that's only what I can tell about, then that fine will be based on an individual calculation. It's not something that we can say in advance. What I can say is that the amount of fines will probably increase with time. As in the first period, it is clear that the Hungarian DPA was issuing small fines, which are very, very small fraction of the possible amount, because it was the first few years of the GDPR, but this will certainly increase.
If I may add to that, it also depends, of course, which authority enforces the breach in question. So it could be that it's a different authority, and that they impose a fine for the violation of a different provision.
Okay, perfect. It's 10:59, so we are almost done. Geert, I don't know if there is any concluding remark as the moderator that you would like to add, or anything of our speakers that would like to add something as a concluding remarks for this webinar of today.
No, I would actually mainly like to thank everyone here who spoke on this interesting topic. Also the audience for listening in, for asking stimulating questions also. In the end, yeah, I mean, it will also depend on the position you are in, of course, when using cookies. If you're a large, very privacy-driven organization with a lot of budget for cookie compliance, if you're a smaller organization, What do you want to do with the cookies? I think everyone needs to check for themselves, how far they need to go, should go, want to go, and what risk they want to take. But my advice would be that given the increased use of cookies, the increased legal regulation and supervision by authorities, and also the trust you need to obtain from users, I would advise every organization to do their best efforts to be compliant. Even myself, when I go to a website and I see a non-compliant banner, I get very irritated. So, it's something that we may all just take seriously, and it's the natural evolution on the internet. So, in the short and longer run, that's what we probably should aim for.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Geert. And I would like to thank a lot all of you, in particular I don't know, Grzegorz, if you wanted to add something.
No.
Okay.
I'm muted, so to say goodbye.
Okay. So I would like to thank you, Greg, and Dr. Vass for being with us as guest speaker, in order also to give us the opportunity to have different overviews from the authority perspective and from a private companies that daily deals with cookies and tracking technologies. That was really interesting. So thank you to the two of you, and also thank to our expert Geert, Alekszej, and Bernd for taking the lawyer role and helping us to having a broader perspective from all the possible problems and issues related to the topic. So thank you very much all, and thank you very much also to our audience of today for following us and for the stimulating questions. I hope to see you again in our next live webinar that, as Geert mentioned, probably will be another one on cookies with a more international overview, like with the CCPA and other regulation around the world. Thank you very much, and hope to see you again very soon. Bye.
Thank you. Cheers.